With our second brief video on the definition of a few basic terms for this course. We have briefly discussed the concept of early modern as a historical periodization, and now we shall consider the term humanism or Humanism, which we see here highlighted. What does humanism mean? Well, as a term, it has more than one meaning. It is both a philosophical term, it's a term used in philosophy, and obviously it is related to man and to the nature of man, okay, and usually to the individual nature of man as such, okay. And when it's used in philosophy, it's subject to very different interpretations in different contexts. But we are not concerned really with that. We are concerned on its use in historical terms, because humanism is also the term used to refer to a cultural movement. A cultural movement rooted in a long period of European history. A long period of time spanning from the end of the 13th century, the end of the 1200s, okay, with its most intense and vast development taking place in the 15th and early 16th centuries. As it applies also to art and architecture, and for the purpose of our course, we shall give a very simple definition of this term. I shall define it, and in fact I would like to use a short text that I already have written down, if I can find it somewhere. Here it is, okay. Let's paste it here. It's more readable. As the consciousness among 14th and 15th century, as it has to do with us, European intellectuals and men of letters, or rather a group of them among a group of European intellectuals and men of letters, but also politicians, men of state, okay, from this period, that a direct link had to be re-established with antique Roman and Greek culture. And by culture we mean here again a very broad term, a very broad spectrum of disciplines, activities, and different kinds of knowledge. Moral philosophy, art, architecture, literature, political ideals, law, and so on. We could add other terms, even ancient science, mathematics, geometry. Okay? Now, this opinion that this re-establishment of a link with ancient culture was necessary was based upon the belief that that culture had been lost at a certain moment, that there were certain aspects of that culture that had been lost and were perhaps extremely relevant to the modern world. This feeling of a break, of a strong discontinuity with antiquity is something new. Because the men of culture of the previous centuries, and even many of the men that lived during the development of the humanist movement, saw themselves and had seen themselves absolutely in continuity with antiquity. This idea of the rupture, of the break, this idea that antiquity had been a radically different period in the evolution of society and knowledge and so on, is a creation of the humanist movement. The humanist movement creates its model and then tries to re-establish it for the present day. The intellectuals of the 15th century see antiquity as a culture that needs to be rediscovered and revived. And this idea of a rebirth of antiquity is at the roots of the term Renaissance, as the term Renaissance comes from naissance, which is a French term that means birth. Okay? So Renaissance means rebirth, very literally. All the implications of this idea of a necessary rebirth of antique ideals and antique knowledge, okay? The implications of this idea are extremely vast and extremely interesting. I'll just point out to one of them, because when you create a break in time, when you create antiquity as a specific period, then you create also something in between antiquity and yourself. And that is the Middle Ages. The invention, the reinvention of antiquity means also the establishment of a very broad periodization in European history that we still use today. Just as we feel that there is something that is called the Renaissance, as at least as a phenomenon, very important phenomenon in culture, in architecture, in politics, and so on, we also consider that if there is a Renaissance, there must be something before it that is different. And not even us, the humanists themselves have called this period the Middle Ages. They felt that it was a period of decline, of decadence. Okay, we don't have this. We have questioned as historians, and our culture has deeply questioned this idea of a decadence that was interrupted by the Renaissance. The Middle Ages are, as any period in European culture, a period with extremely advanced moments of wealth, of technical progress, of cultural development, alternated to moments of crisis, just as what happened before and what will happen afterwards. Okay, we don't have this idea of a long dark period that finally, okay, is ended in the 15th and 16th centuries. But this great subdivision of time, okay, in antiquity, the Middle Ages, and modernity, okay, was actually one of the results, one of the cultural, long-lasting cultural results of the Renaissance, of the humanist movement. Another important concept that accompanies this idea of the rebirth of antiquity has to do with how this rebirth should be performed. Now, it was a precise conviction of the humanist men of letters that the rediscovery or rebirth of ancient culture was to be sought through scholarship. That is, through the study and edition of ancient literary, philosophical, technical, scientific, literary texts, and also through the study of works of art, monuments, and in general, ancient artifacts. It's what I have written here on a short text that I will later upload on the website. This, let's say, new ideal of progress through scholarship, in a certain sense, promoted a new ideal of human activity based on the personal engagement on this cultural and social project, and promoted a new relevance on scholarship as the most dignified form of human activity. I have here an image, the first slide, okay, we will use for our course, and we will use countless slides after this one. That is an ideal and even an ironic scheme of the elevation of the humanist man over other beings and other modes of humanity. Okay, I'll upload this link to this web page. This image is from a text by Charles de Bouelle, which is a French humanist of the early 16th century. What is he showing us? Oops, sorry. Here. What is he trying to say? Okay, we have here the different levels of human being and the different levels even of existence on the left, the different kinds of matter. Let's start from the left to the right. We have stones, so inanimate matter. We have plants, and stones just exist. Est. It's Latin. Then we have vegetal life, like a tree. And the tree doesn't only exist, but he lives, vivit. Then we have animals, and animals feel. They sentit, they feel, and we have here a horse. And then we have man, and man's, let's say, difference from all other animals is that he's intelligent. He's an intelligent creature, and a rational one. We see up here, rationale, intelligit. Now, this same difference, let's say, in being, okay, can be also found in humanity itself. And here, the humanist irony and the humanist spirit comes out. We have people who just are and who do nothing in their life. They're just like stones, like minerals. And here we see a guy that's sleeping and does absolutely nothing. Then we have another level of humanity, which is our people that are and that they also live. We could say they live socially. They eat, and probably they eat together, okay? They are vital, but nothing more than that. Then we have a third level, which is the level of passions and of feelings and sensuality, okay? And we have here the lady that's looking in the mirror or the man that's looking in the mirror, okay? And this is already a more complex kind of being. But real humanity is represented by the homo studiosus, by the man, by the scholar, by the man who uses his rational faculty to advance in knowledge. This doesn't mean that the studiosus, and here we are back again to myself, this doesn't mean that the humanist is disengaged from society. On the other hand, the humanist researches and studies in order so that society can benefit from the advancement of knowledge. The paradox in this concept is that the advancement of knowledge is done through the recovery of ancient knowledge, first of all. And this is what Burke, another very important scholar of the Renaissance, calls the Renaissance paradox. He says, paradoxical as it may seem, the Renaissance movement was a systematic attempt to go forward by going back. And this general definition we gave of humanism as a movement, that it has to do a lot with architecture, is not only our belief today, but has been the, let's say, the belief at the foundations of the study of Renaissance architecture. There is an entire library of books that deals with the relationship between humanism and architecture, between humanists as a group of intellectuals and architects who sometimes totally belonged to this group and sometimes had, in any case, strong ties and cultural relations with the more, let's say, sophisticated humanist circles. A groundbreaking publication that established once and for all this parallel between architecture of the 15th and 16th centuries and humanism as a movement is a book by Rudolf Wittkower. We see here its cover, published in 1949 in its first edition, but still being published and sold today. It has become a classical reading for architectural and art historians, and not only them. A book called Architectural Principles in the Age of Humanism. Okay, here, Wittkower establishes through a series of very dense and very rich chapters and case studies. Among them, he studies, there's a very important chapter dedicated to an Italian architect we shall talk about, called Leon Battista Alberti. Wittkower establishes a strong connection between the architectural principles of the 15th and 16th centuries and the age of humanism. So I think this is enough to establish the importance of this term, and after a small pause again, we shall deal with perhaps the more articulate and more complex concept that we want to talk about today, which is antiquity itself, l'antico.